The economic situation in the USA remains tense. The trade war with China has caused a shortage of microchips, rare earth metals, and robotics components. Robotization is developing unevenly. The United States is actively developing artificial intelligence for military purposes, investing enormous funds in it. The economic sector is developing more slowly than the military one. Despite advances in robotics, the country's residents have faced a harsh reality. Mass job cuts and unemployment reaching 15% are putting the country at a historical high since the 2020 pandemic. People are demanding an immediate abandonment of this technology in favor of manual labor. The USA has found itself in energy dependence, but not on a country, rather on robots. Over the past 5 years, people have stopped monitoring the operation of power plants, and energy experts were laid off to make way for the introduction of robots. The USA ranks second in the world in the number of robots, with 30 million of them here. Despite Trump's policies in the 2020s, the Republicans maintained leadership until 2048. But due to the labor, economic, and political crisis in the country, they yielded to the Democrats. In the U.S. elections, the Democrat Marco Gazin won. He is known for his radical reformist ideas and his desire to strengthen the country's stability to implement major projects. The Western states, traditionally supporting the Democrats, gave their votes to the Republicans in the last 2 presidential elections. However, this turned out to be insufficient for a Republican Party victory. Meanwhile, the southern states of the USA are undergoing significant changes. Native Americans are gradually losing their dominant position in politics, giving way to migrants. The new policy of the western states significantly affects the stagnation of the economy. Once prosperous California, due to political instability and disagreements between the western and eastern regions on issues of policy and migration, has begun to noticeably slow down.
Artie, what do you think about the current state of affairs?
What's the point of such questions?
I was told that in the near future you will have to use the modules built into the robots, so that they rise up against peaceful people. Our director has come up with a rather interesting plan.
I personally don't care. The main thing is that it starts faster. I'm already fed up with rich people who ruined my life.
Stop messing around. An order has come from above. Immediately check all computers. We must start an uprising across America tomorrow.
On December 20th, a decree was issued on the expansion of robotization in the USA, especially in the western region, where progress is being hindered due to resistance from local authorities. The presidential administration was counting on public support for its idea, but unexpectedly encountered resistance. The western states opposed the current U.S. policy. The eastern regions showed greater loyalty, as their economy is closely tied to Western Europe and the eastern part of South America, and automation was advancing there more quickly. Almost all Western countries are engulfed in protests. Participants are demanding an immediate abandonment of robotization and the return of jobs to people. The economic downturn in the USA has continued for the second year, and employers are increasingly replacing people with machines. The government began providing assistance to loyal states in order to improve their situation. Troops were sent to Republican states, including California, Oregon, and Washington. The situation was worsening. The protesters did not back down, but entered into a direct conflict with the army. They had nothing to lose. The administrations of Western countries, led by migrants, demanded that Washington immediately withdraw the guard. Otherwise, the authorities could use troops loyal to them to eliminate the threat to the security of the states. This became the first open confrontation in a long time between state armies and the states. The US Supreme Court quickly intervened in this situation. A review for a constitutional violation against the president is currently underway. The Republicans, taking advantage of the crisis, are preparing for an open confrontation with the Democrats. In Congress, where Republicans hold 49% of the seats, the impeachment of the current president is being prepared. The Supreme Court demands the immediate withdrawal of troops from the western states, but this demand is being ignored. On December 29th, at a session of Congress, President Marco Jason expressed surprise at what was happening. As an example, he cited the Republicans, especially Trump, who, despite pressure, pursued his goals. This argument did not convince the congressman. On the contrary, some Democrats decided to oppose their leader by supporting the Republicans. This significantly weakened the position of the Democratic Party. In 2049, Americans celebrate the new year with a sense of anxiety. The economic miracle and stability that the Democrats spoke of collapsed due to their own political decisions. No one thought that the party defending the rights of the people would turn against its own citizens. In the western states, protests were growing, and local authorities banned robots and required the use of manual labor. Eastern entrepreneurs and authorities condemned this decision. California will suffer the most, as its economy relied on robots. Local authorities of the states asked the protesters not to use key roads important for the economy. They explained that disrupting transportation could lead to a serious crisis. The protesters met with officials and continued to hold actions in all the western states, without obstructing traffic on important routes. The U.S. government is looking for ways to remove the governors of the western states. The situation is heating up. Upon learning this, the residents of Central America protested against the current authorities. People are afraid that the Democrats might use radical methods and get rid of opponents. The media actively criticizes the government's actions. The governments of Canada and Mexico expressed condemnation of the actions of the U.S. authorities. While the army at the border is in confusion, Mexican cartels have begun to penetrate into the territory of the United States. Central America has blocked land communication with the West, which became an act of resistance against the authorities. The population is armed and ready to open fire against the police and the army. The police are limited to arresting radicals who violate public order. On January 15th, a meeting of Western governors took place in California. They agreed on a joint resistance to the authorities. A unified law was adopted, and the armed forces were nationalized. Soldiers who did not agree with the new order began to leave the Western states. China actively intervened in the internal politics of the USA. Western countries accepted China's assistance, which gave it leverage over the elites. Congress urgently convened and discussed the introduction of martial law. the President of the USA signed the corresponding decree on the same day. This led to the isolation of the Western states from domestic trade. The European Union did not comment on the situation in the United States. European countries were outraged that the Republicans were using them for their own interests. The Russian Federation took a neutral position, awaiting new developments. The US military began redeploying troops to the west to stabilize the situation. Congress approved expanding the president's powers to combat security threats. Unemployment in the country reached 20% in just 2 months. People are still dissatisfied, as the economy remains stagnant and there are no solutions. On January 20th, a rally in support of the authorities took place. In the West, the number of participants was small, unlike in the East. Politicians, military personnel, actors, and businessmen called on citizens to stop undermining the stability of the country. Migrants actively took over the media and are urging the residents of the USA to take to the streets to change the situation. On January 27th, Congress passed a law restricting firearm ownership for citizens. The police were given the right to shoot without warning for its violation. This caused public outrage. On the one hand, people ignored the law. On the other hand, police officers also did not comply with it, fearing for their lives. Sheriffs and police chiefs stated that they would not enforce the law in order to protect their officers. On February 1st, the U.S. Army, numbering 200,000 people, began an operation to seize government buildings in the western states. They were opposed by an army of 144,000 people. On February 2nd, the western states announced their secession from the United States and the creation of a new state, the American States of the West. For the first time in the last 2 centuries, a civil war began in the U.S. Migrants, unable to endure the violence, responded with aggression. The American Western States, AWS, demanded to stop the military operation, otherwise a lot of blood would be shed. The USA rejected the ultimatum, stating that they would rid the country of the security threat. China began secretly sponsoring the AWS financially and by supplying necessary goods. AWS is not recognized by democratic countries. On the contrary, many countries condemned the actions and demanded an end to the violence. Beijing and Moscow believe that democratic countries violate their principles by allowing the people to decide whether to remain in the state or not. The USA began an attack from Arizona. 40,000 soldiers crossed the border and launched an offensive. They were opposed by an army of 25,000 people. Soon, local residents joined the war, and the number of AWS armed forces grew to 56,000. Hostilities ceased. The operation lasted about 3 months. The United States blocked the internet in the western states and isolated them from the network. This helped capture Arizona, but the success was short-lived. On the border with California, the situation changed. Reinforcements arrived, and the extended front complicated the situation. The western states launched a counterattack, freed the surrounded troops in the major cities of Arizona, and retreated to the border with California. US President Marco Gazin publicly stated that if the western states do not stop military actions, and do not hand over the criminals who unleashed the war, the US will start a new operation to eliminate the top of the new formation. In the western states of the US, limited internet access has appeared. The western states refuse the ultimatum. They are establishing internal connections to create a united front. Because of this, the states have to return to technologies of the last century. Defense Secretary Henry Hausen announced the expansion of military capabilities in the upcoming operation. Delta Squad has been deployed to the west. Analysts believe that the US government aims to end the war with a single powerful strike. In this war, the USA departed from its traditional scorched earth tactics for the first time. Since the conflict unfolded against its own people, the Department of Defense was forced to develop an entirely new strategy. They decided to avoid major cities, surrounding them with small forces and isolating them from the outside world. At the same time, the main forces continued to advance westward, aiming to push the enemy out. The total losses of both sides amounted to just over 10,000 people killed and wounded. The U.S. economy is currently experiencing a recession due to the war in the West. Unemployment across the country has risen to 38%, and in the eastern U.S. to 10%. China recognized the western states of America as an independent country, which surprised the leading global players. China has effectively overtaken the USA in the economic race, but it seems that is not enough for it. Now Beijing seeks to completely plunge America into a deep economic downturn in order to eliminate a competitor. Europe has expressed condemnation, but so far cannot take any action.
Damn, where is he? When will he come?
Glad to see you, Alex.
Sam, I urgently need your support. I have carried out your order to confront the East, but everything has reached the point where war has begun. When will you start acting?
Don't worry, we are almost ready. We need another 2 weeks to start a full-scale operation in the history of mankind. For your protection, I advise you to temporarily leave the open sky and airwaves if you want to survive.
On May 2nd, something unexpected happened in the USA. Across the entire eastern part of the country, robots went out of control and began destroying everything around them. The military and police tried to stop them, but the robots quickly neutralized the threat. The Americans grabbed their weapons, but no one anticipated that the robots would respond in kind. Chaos began in the eastern part of the country. Robots rose up in all major cities of the country. 29 million machines began to destroy the cities, but moved only to the west, leaving ruins behind them. The US Army was deployed to the east to contain any possible advance of the rebels. About 70,000 soldiers were concentrated at the front line. The President, bypassing Congress and the Senate, declared a state of emergency in the eastern United States and enacted a law prohibiting civilians from approaching robots. Republicans and Democrats were forced to unite. The Supreme Court suspended the lawsuit against the president until the end of the crisis. 30 minutes after the chaos began, the robots took over all power plants and oil refineries. Electricity across the country was completely shut off, and gasoline stopped reaching gas stations. People in the East are hastily leaving their homes. The wealthy are hiding underground, while ordinary people are fleeing from cities to villages or forests. The government has realized the scale of the problem. At the same time, similar events are happening in China, Russia, and the European Union. Robots are beginning combat operations against the authorities. An hour later, the internet went down. The army lost its main advantage, satellites, which became vulnerable to sudden attacks. Specialists are desperately trying to restore communication, but so far without success. Chaos reigns in the American command. No one knows how to act. Nebraska reported an invasion of armed robots. The state was quickly taken over by mechanical creatures. In 15 hours, the state of Nebraska was completely under control. Resistance continues, but key cities, roads, and important economic facilities have already been captured. Those who managed to avoid clashes have left the state. Due to the chaos in the command center, the U.S. military and politicians missed the moment when they lost an entire state. Robots have halted the advance and are destroying the last pockets of resistance. No one expected this to happen. The robot uprising changed the world. Cables and pipes were damaged everywhere. Logistics collapsed, and politicians did not understand what was happening. The United States found itself in isolation. Mexico was consumed with fighting the cartels, and the Canadian army was too small. The other countries of the American continent preferred not to intervene. No one knew how to explain this to the public. However, one thing was clear to everyone. The global world would change beyond recognition in the coming years. The old powers would lose their influence, and new ones would take their place, occupying the vacated niche. This is what politicians claimed. Despite the chaos at the top of the USA, politicians and the military are not ready to lose their country. The military had to roll back military technology by a century, as the West did, to confront robots. There remained an important question: what to do with electricity, gas, and fuel? The most critical facilities were seized by robots in the first minutes of the uprising. Politicians were scratching their heads. Even if the stations were liberated, there would be no one to operate them. Experts were dismissed 10 years ago, and many of them will refuse to return, preferring to hide to protect their lives. The Western states, despite the robot uprising, were preparing to reclaim lost territories. The robots, which had replaced humans, did not rebel and continued to work as before. Citizens and politicians were unaware of the attack, as communications had been disrupted. Only a few knew about the robot attack.